For the most updated version of the Glyphs RPG blueprint, tokens, accessories and resources, please visit www.glyphsrpg.com. Also visit 2ddice.com for our internationally popular D20 RPG coins and our other masterful coin works.
Hello again, it's Charlie, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with Chapter 21, which talks about environments, okay? So I'm going to do things a little bit differently in this chapter. I'm not going to just go down and review the entire thing. I'm going to start off with a brief overview as to the different types of locations we look at, and then I'm going to spend most of the time focusing on our randomization of different environmental traits. Okay, so I've always been saying throughout the tutorials that as an architect you are a builder. Okay, so you're a step above a regular game master as far as I'm concerned. Okay, if you can master this system, I firmly believe that. At least that's my own opinion. Okay, but when we're talking about randomization, in case you haven't noticed by now, especially when you're dealing with environments and civilizations, as we're going to get into later in the next chapter, I like to think of myself more as a painter also. Okay, so you're painting images from your mind into your players' minds, into their mind's eye, and we're going to be using the token to great lengths here to help make that happen. So rather than once again referring to a bunch of different lists that are already pre-made that kind of set the a cookie cutter standard for you, I guess you could say, we're going to be doing some painting of our own, basically using the tokens glyphs here in a moment. So before we go that far, let's just go look at a quick overview on the environments. Okay, what are we talking about here? So in glyphs, environments are basically locations. Okay, so a location is anywhere that the character experiences. So wherever that character is in a particular moment of time, in a predefined amount of space. So teeny tiny room, or a vast sprawl of land. Okay, locations in particular, I'm mostly focusing on the environment, so landscapes, non-man-made type of places. Okay, here goes that annoying warning again. Okay, hold on. Okay, so as you'll see here, page 344, it talks about that a little bit here in detail, and pretty much mentions that we do embrace a random generation approach to environments. Okay, and we're going to get into that here shortly. So that's all this talks about here. Now, one note I just want to leave you with here before we go further. So pacing. Now, as you're running your campaign session, you the architect, by and large, control the pacing of the story. I mean, your players may ramble and banter back and forth and take their time with their decisions, but overall, you are the one controlling the pacing of the session. So one major impact on that is how you render out your environment. So, again, if you're going for a lot of realism and you're really trying to immerse your players in a particular setting, by all means go into great detail about everything. Okay, especially with senses. Immerse emerge the senses, in your character surroundings. So the smell, of the mist, rising in the morning. Okay, the footsteps that walk, on leaves. How does it sound like? How does it feel like under your character's feet? Right? How do the sun rays affect your eyesight when you first wake up? Things like that. Okay, but on the other hand, if you spend too much time going into those kind of details, you can certainly slow things down. So just keep that in mind, especially when we're talking about environments, because that's really important. Because on one hand, you want to do a nice job building your travelers' worlds so they can experience it, and you want every experience to be unique and really awesome, because role-playing, we mundane reality with this. So you definitely want to do that, but at the same token, control the pace as much as possible. So, when characters are just traveling through one space and just they haven't reached their main objective yet in the story or that section, just narrate and basically imply that they've traversed a section, okay, in order to save time, unless you really think it's important for them to role play every tiny little piece of land that they're traveling on. That's entirely up to you. Again, just something to be aware of. There is no right or wrong answer to that. Okay, so before we get into the random tutorial and the fun part, we're gonna just talk about location types real quick. So in Glyphs, I categorize locations, into four main types. So landscapes, the most common one, subterranean locations, aquatic locations, and celestial locations. Okay, so basically a landscape is exactly what it means. A nice sprawl of land, right? A lot of transient beings may travel through. Okay, sprawling, rolling hills, beautiful grass, sand, anything that's generally natural, right? Rocks. Okay, again, the majority of role-playing systems and campaigns are going to happen here. Okay, subterranean locations. Okay, generally they boast layers of rock, crazy exotic minerals, or very rugged features. Okay, generally, as far as the way I see it anyways, they're some of the most dangerous types of locations that your characters can travel in. Okay, you look at the networks of caves, tunnel systems, underground dungeons, all this craziness, right? And again, I think so they're probably some of the most hostile. Okay, because besides from all the the dark creatures that dwell under there, they can be riddled with natural environmental hazards, such as unstable rocks, mud, gases, the darkness itself, and even lava and other craziness. So the location itself, when we're talking about subterranean locations, can be very dangerous to your traveler. So that's something to keep in mind there. Just a quick tip. Then we have aquatic locations. Okay, pretty straightforward. So the ocean, lakes, rivers, any body of water that functions as the location that your character's traveling in, right? Okay, so generally the only way to travel on them is, I would think, using some sort of magic or submersible vehicle to experience it, right? I would think that's the only way you could experience it. So that's all that talks about here. Okay, now on one hand, you could find it to an advantage of using an aquatic location to travel to, a landscape, I guess you could say, if you want to be concealed and all that stuff, emerge from the waters with the element of surprise. Okay, but keep in mind that aquatic locations, can be very unforgiving as well. Okay, you're talking about things like current, low temperatures, any predators that are lurking in the waters, high pressure, the lower you go, the lack of air, restricted movements. All these things can have a very heavy impact on how your character functions. Okay, so just keep that in mind if you're playing in an aquatic location. And finally, the last category that I'm looking at here are celestial locations. Okay, so when we talk celestial, I'm talking about the vacuum of space. Okay, I guess you could interpret it to mean the sky if you're going to play in a sky setting, but generally I'm referring to outer space. So when you're playing in that setting, only the most reliable vehicle or powers or equipment, okay, depending on how you're viewing things, can protect the characters from the dark abyss of space, right? Okay, so by definition, at least as far as I look at it, as long as there's a lack of sustainable atmosphere, okay, so like, obviously deep space or an asteroid or a moon, or some moon, shall I say, I know some have atmospheres, but, generally the average moon, okay, or ruins in the middle of space, all the crazy things you can think of, I would consider those to be a celestial location in and of themselves. Okay, so take a look here at the top. Okay, location types. This is going to be how we randomize to figure out what type of location, which is going to build on what we're going to go to here in a minute. So landscapes, if you just, want to randomly create something from scratch, okay, simply spend the token and interpret your element glyphs. So we're going to be looking at these a lot. Element glyphs and states glyphs here. So carbon would represent a landscape. Fire would represent a subterranean location. Water would obviously represent an aquatic location. And air, we're looking at celestial as far as locations go. Okay, so that's just a general overview on the different location types, and going forward on how we're going to be looking at the environment that your character experiences. Okay, so just keep those notes in mind. Now let's move on to the fun part. And I'm going to randomize the process for creating different types of locations, because again, I look at it almost like painting instead of just referring to randomized list, and you're going to see why. Not only is it fun, but it's important. At least that's the way I see it. So stay tuned here shortly, and we're going to have some fun. Segment of the randomization portion of the environments chapter. First off, I'm not going to be going in an exact order based on the way it's arranged in the book. I found this flow works out better for tutorial purposes. So first we're going to talk about distances and features and how to come up with that just using the tokens clues. Okay, so let's get started. Let's have some fun. So got my token here, got my OmniGrid. Now for most of these calculations you don't need the OmniGrid at all, but if you want to use color or if you need letter clues for whatever reason, that is here available, but it's also a very nice surface to use. Okay, so let's take a look here. So I'm just going to get comfortable here, get my token ready, and let's start with feet. And again, all of this is in the book, in the environment chapter. I'm just following a little bit different flow, like I said, more for clinical purposes. On my right here, I have my notes that I'm going to be taking. Now, when you randomize, you don't have to randomize every single tiny detail that's listed here. These are simply options that are available to you. They're definitely nice to have, especially when we get to rendering some of the actual environments just using clues. It can be a pretty neat process. It's to me, it's a game changer really for randomization because it's more visual in nature. Okay, anyways, enough rambling on my part. So let's talk about random sizes. Okay, so how do we randomize feet? Okay, very simple. We're going to refer to our element glyphs. Okay, so carbon, fire, water, and air. And like I've mentioned earlier on during the tutorials, this is one of those times that they will have a numerical value range. So carbon being the least and air being the most. So in this case, for feet, we need to look first, we need to determine the amount of zeros that can be in the feet. Okay, so how many is that going to work? So carbon in the book has a value of 1 0, fire has a value of 2 zeros, water has a value of 3 zeros, and air has a value of 4 zeros. Okay, so first we need to determine the amount of zeros in the randomized feet, and then we have to generate the number that precedes the zero. So again, it sounds awfully complicated, but it's very simple in practice. Watch this. So I'm just going to go here, lightly spin, and from my perspective, I just spun a, let's see, oh, guess what? They're level here, so element glyphs. So fire and carbon are level, but I'm looking at fire, so that's 2 zeros, okay? So 0, 0, and then now I have to generate the number that precedes that. So in this case, when you generate the number that precedes something, you use the digits, okay? So here, my digits, in this case, they're level, so it's 2. So 200 feet, okay? My writing's bad, we already know that, but see? 200 feet. That was completely random, okay? So first, do your zeros. With feet, I'm using the element glyphs because the element glyphs gives you a shorter range of possibilities, unlike the digits. The digits, 0 through 9 or 1 through 10, have a lot more options available when you're talking numbers. I mean, that can change things really quickly. So that's the reason why we use the element glyphs, because they only give you, 1 through 4 zeros range when we're talking feet. Okay, you can change that to digits if you need to for whatever you're doing, but I think that's, in most cases, going to be a smarter approach. So with feet, generate your zeros first using the element glyphs, and then spin again. Precedes it. So 200 feet. Okay, very simple. Okay, with miles, we're going to do the same thing. Let's take a look. So let's see, with miles, let me see here, let me look at my notations. So when you're dealing with terrestrial or nautical miles, then you simply perform the same exact calculation that I just did with feet, okay? Now, when you're dealing with space, that's a totally different animal, right? So this is one of those examples that instead of using the element glyphs, because space is so vast, we want to look at things a lot broader, right? So same concept though. We're first going to generate our zeros and then our number that precedes it, except we're not going to be using the element glyphs for space, for miles. We're going to be using the digits. So very simple. Span to randomize. Oh, guess what? 0. So that's 10 zeros. Okay, that's a lot of miles. Okay, and then let's see. So I got my zeros. I got 10 zeros. So that's pretty ridiculous. A little bit, and then just lightly spin in there. Okay, hopefully you can see good. Oh, and guess what? 0 again. That's insane. So we got the number of zeros, and now we got the number that precedes it. So here, wow. So as you can see in the vastness of space, look how ridiculous that is. So that is probably the largest, to my observation, obviously that's the largest randomized mile you could come up with. So 100 billion miles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zeros, right? That's what we did first. Plus the 0 here, that came because the first one was 10. So that's 10 zeros here. And then I just spun a 10 to precede it. So this is 100 billion miles that I just did. So if I need a distance, from one planet to another in space, as an example, it would be 100 billion miles away, okay? Now the same goes for light years. You can simply take the same calculation that you do for miles, okay? Not in space miles. If you need to, I guess you could, but regular miles, and just convert it to light years. So, same principle would apply, right? So same as above. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Okay, so with all that, again, like I said, all you got to do when you're talking feet, miles, light years, etc., okay, or if you're measuring something's size in feet, also that could also apply. Simply generate your zeros first with either the element glyphs or the digits, depending on your scenario, and then spin the digit, the number that precedes it. Okay, and that's all there is to it. Okay, so now let's move on. Let's talk about. Let's see, let me go down to my notes here. Let's talk about cloud states. Let's see, that's my annoying cat bothering me in the background. I do apologize. Okay, so let's talk about clouds, color, opacity, and random seasons. So let's say that for the environment you need random clouds. Okay, how do we describe those realistically? Okay, so for that, we're going to be referring to the states glyphs. So in this case, we're not going to be considering element glyphs. We're going to look at the states glyphs. States glyphs, like I've mentioned, they're really good when you want to uncover the condition of something. So what's the condition of X subject, right? What's their arrangement? What are their qualities? That's essentially what we're talking about with the states glyphs in general. So for clouds, let's take a look. So in the book, it gives you the definitions that I came up with that I think are the most appropriate. Again, these are all subjective in nature because this is an oracle. But let's say I randomly want to know the state of the clouds. If, as a GM, I'm describing it. So lightly spin. And so from my vantage point, I got the triangle glyph. Okay. Now, notice here, like I said, the states glyphs have a symbol within a symbol. So here you got the electrified, wavy looking symbol inside the triangle. So these are going to be very useful, quite often when you're dealing with environmental type subjects. Okay, so here, as an example, the glyph that I just spun is the states glyph, the triangle glyph, and inside it's got like a wavy electrical type pattern. Okay, my mind interprets that as a wispy type of cloud structure. So when I see that, I think of wispy clouds in this context. So, and again, there's other definitions in the book, okay, for you to see until you get comfortable using it. I do recommend practicing through this chapter if you're going to be a game master and an architect. Take your time and be comfortable with them. But in this example, it's wispy clouds. Okay, that's all I do. Okay, so wispy clouds. Let me write that down, because as a game master, I'm taking notes, right? Okay, so let's say I want to know something's random color or finish. Okay, very simple. So first of all, we've already talked about colors earlier on with the OmniGrid. Just if you want to randomize colors, simply spin it or just toss it in randomly, you know, whatever is easier for you. I personally like this approach. You know, I'm not focusing on anything. I just toss it in, or, you know, very light spin, however you prefer. That's your choice to get my answer. So K is purple. So, you know, in this example, I guess you could say the clouds, or the wispy clouds, are purple, right? Okay, that's if I'm looking at color. And you can look at color for anything, not just this. I mean, anything has color, right? So we're talking about finish, though. So finish, what are we talking about? Okay, something, and I'm not talking about clouds here. I'm talking about anything. If you want to know the visual finish of a subject, right? So what does it look like? Is it flat, shiny? Is it glowing, or is it textured? So those are the kind of things that we're talking about when we talk about finish. So random color we just did, random finish. Let me just lightly drop that in there. And again, we're going to look at the states glyphs. Okay, let me spin that again. Let me get a little more randomization. Let's try my luck here. Okay, so here the most upright is the circle. See here, so the circle, it's got the dots in there. Now again, here I want to look, you know, in the middle, because this tells me more. So it's got a, you know, an array of dots here in that circle states glyph. Okay, so in this case, with finish, you could interpret that the subject is glowing. So maybe there's a stone you're describing and you want to add a random finish to it. You know, oh wow, suddenly it's glowing, right? That's how you can interpret this. Let's say I spun again, right? Toss it, and let's say just for the sake of example, let's say it lands on the hexagon states glyph, right? In the middle there, you have a clustered type formation. Okay, again, the internal symbols of these are very important to look at, especially with this. Okay, you could say that it's very textured. So the subject, you know, the rock is very textured. It's got a very unique texture to it. Then that's will be the subject of your focus in that example. Okay, so let's see. So we got that covered. Random luminosity. Let's talk about that. So when we're talking about random luminosity, we're talking about how light is handled when we're talking about a subject. So again, generally you're going to have four main qualities to choose from. You know, something can be transparent, can be reflective, can be radiant, right, or opaque. Okay, that's what I'm talking about when I'm referring to random luminosity. So again, just look at your states glyphs. Randomly spin and look at your states glyphs. Okay, so here I'm looking at the square. It's got lines in the middle. So the lines communicate to me. It's very clear. It's transparent. You know, light passes through. At that moment, for that context, that's what that communicates to me. Okay. So in this case, your answer would be transparent. Okay. So the wall is transparent, right? So glass, right? That's random. Let's say I spin again randomly, right? Again, this is just clinical. And let's say, I don't know, whatever, it just lands. Let's say it lands. Again, look at the dot arrangements, and in the context that I'm looking for, that tells me the subject is radiant. Okay, you know, dots of light, you know, sparkling, maybe sparkling, radiant, whatever you want to call it. You could interpret that as that. In this context, that to me makes sense, right? Okay, so got that covered. Now, very simple calculation here. So let's say you're narrating a scene and the player asks you what season it is, because they're, you know, maybe that's very important to their character on how they're dressed and how they're equipped to handle the situation. So random season. Oh, okay, very simple. Just look at your element glyphs. Okay, very simple. So lightly spin, and I have carbon. So carbon is spring. So in your setting at that moment in time, it is spring. Okay, so in the book, you know, carbon would be spring. You know, fire is summer. I mean, think about it. It's hot, right? Water would be fall, and winter would be air. Okay, so again, those are my interpretations, and I think they make perfect sense. And these are some really neat ways that you can use some very useful data for your environment. Now, let's get into the different types of environments themselves. Okay, so stay tuned here in just a second. We randomize the elements of a random landscape, right? So very simple. Once again, we're going to use our token OmniGrids there, mostly just for the convenience of the surface in this case, unless I want to look at colors. Okay, we've already covered that. So with landscapes and in glyphs, at least, I'm going to be looking at 5 different aspects that I want to portray. Now, it's up to you, the architect, on which you need to portray at the moment in time, or if you need to portray them all, depending on how detailed you want to get. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at the ground plane or the surface. Okay, any impressions that might be there in the landscape, any growth features potentially, right? Any specific type of terrain layout, and any terrain textures that are important. Let me close this thing here, and let's take a look. So again, once again, we're going to be using the states glyphs for the most of this, okay? And simply spin. Very straightforward. So here, first I'm talking about the ground plane, and again, it says totally random. Player says, where am I, right? You haven't even started the game yet, and he's like, okay, what's my setting look like? You haven't pre-made one, you just want to randomly go for something. That's what we're trying to do here. So I just spun, and I'm looking at my states glyphs, which are right here, right? We already know that. So here, this is the most upright from my vantage point. So the hexagon clustered. So again, make sure that with the states glyphs, the outer shape is important in some cases when you're talking geometry, but the most important ones in most cases are the inner symbols. Okay, so very important. So in this case, the clustered symbol tells me that that's a canyon. Okay, so right off the bat, you know this character is on a canyon, or asking about the canyon, or depending on what scenario you're doing. So this is a canyon we're talking, or I'm sorry, a cavern. We're talking about a cavern here. So right off the bat, that's what that is. Okay, so then we want to spin again. If we want to know about any specific impressions, right, just shake it, spin it, randomize. Okay, once again, it's the hexagon, and again, I'm not randomizing too well. I'm just showing you what we're doing here to read it, right, how we get these results. So for ground plane, we have, let's see, we've already covered it's a cavern. And again, it doesn't hurt to take notes like I am on the side here. Okay, it helps the architect remember. So impressions, I got again a hexagon, so that's some kind of a formation, right? You could say that this cavern that they're in has a very interesting rock formation inside, a very unique formation that makes it stand out above other caverns. Okay, that's just very general, but in this case, okay. The definitions for each of these are listed in the chapter, so feel free to look at them at your leisure, but that's how I'm coming up with these. Okay, so pretty straightforward. So we know that there's a cavern with a very unique formation of some kind. Okay, if you wanted to, you could randomize what kind of formation with letter clues here. Okay, if you wanted to do that. So let's see. Doesn't really tell me much. Let's go with H. Okay. Doesn't really tell me much. So I'm going to stick with a rock formation. Okay. So now let's look if there's any growth inside this cavern. Okay. Any particular growth features? Okay. You could say yes or no if you spin or flip. Okay. Negative means no, but let's say there are. Okay. Let's say it was yes, and let's say there are growth features. Simply spin. And in this case, the side of the token that it lands on, positive or negative, can fluctuate the option that you're going to give. That gives you more options. So in this case, my states glyphs, let's say it lands here, slightly above here, the circle, the dot circle, and it's on the positive side. So the dotted circle on the positive side. So there's a bush. So okay. So again, the dots in this context tells me there's a bush. Okay, very bushy type textures. I can visualize that with lots of dots, right? If you can see that in your mind, that certainly makes sense to me. Again, the definitions are right there in the book for you that I came up with, but that's what that communicates to growth of concern. Remember, that's what we're talking about in this part, is growth feature. So suddenly you've got a cavern with a very interesting rock formation, and you see for growth features you have some kind of weird thick bushes that are somehow in a cavern, which doesn't make sense. But if you dig deep into the history of that there's a source of water or light that somehow feeds this bush, or maybe it's something that doesn't belong there. But in any case, that's a random growth feature. Remember, the more random you get, the more weird and abstract things can get. But in this case, we have a cavern that's got a really awesome rock formation inside, and there's some bushes that are in there. Okay, or some very thick shrubs of some kind, or something like it, or maybe spongy like plants. Okay, depending on how you want to describe it. There is no right or wrong answer, but that's what I see in my mind's eye currently. Okay, let's say I want to get more detailed with this random landscape. Okay, I want to talk about how the terrain is actually laid out inside. So spin and look at your element glyphs, or your states glyphs. So here, circle, dotted circle, and I was in a cave, right? So let's say, oh wow, it's demolished. So the current layout of this particular cave. Now, if you'll notice here, the more clues we give as we're painting the picture, you can automatically start building a story from this. So already, I know in this cavern, it's got a very interesting rock formation with odd bushes, or spongy-like bushes in there, is demolished. So maybe somebody was here before my party, maybe there was a natural disaster, but in any case, you know that this cavern, for whatever reason, is not in the condition that it was. So maybe the character has to find a different way in, or out into the innermost layers, or whatever. Again, that's just purely random. You can go into more detail from there with the path glyphs if you need to. So it's demolished, but okay, which way did the path lead? Okay, oh, it's S. It's here. It's winding around. So you can go into more details like that if you need to, based on your context. But I'm very clinical here. I'm just showing you. So it's demolished, and detail you want to add to this whole thing. Okay, if you need to. Okay, terrain textures. Okay, so randomly spin. And looking at the states glyphs again, I got the hexagon. Remember, states glyphs change an overall state and condition of things. That's essentially what we're referring to. So that's why I'm using these glyphs. Okay, so states glyphs. Let's take a look here at my notations. So terrain textures, and we spun the hexagon, and we are in a cavern. Oh, guess what? Let's see. It's painted. So once again, that makes sense. You could interpret this glyph here, okay, the hexagon, the cluster inside. In that context, it's very structurally arranged. It means structure and nice arrangement. It's painted or drawn. So guess what? Suddenly we have a cavern, right? It's got a very interesting rock formation, or maybe even a statue that's sculpted in there. Okay, you can interpret formation however you want to. It's a very vague word, right? Okay, it's got some odd bushes, or unique kind of spongy looking plants or whatever, right? Okay, it's been demolished. You're not sure if it was done by the last party or natural. And then finally, we have drawings. So this cavern has drawings of some kind on it. That's up to you, the architect, to interpret how. Okay. So these clues right here that I just did, I know it sounds long-winded, but in practice it's instant. I'm just showing you how I'm getting them, okay? And here is my awful chicken scratch notes to prove that. So as a game master, when you're jotting these clues down, always have a sheet of paper on the side, write it down, and the more you do, the quicker it works your mind, and the more detail you get awfully quickly. And in a lot of cases, it's not that hard to form a story just from this picture alone, okay? So that's a really nice reason to use a visual method like my system uses once you understand how the glyphs work, okay? So next, we're going to talk about aquatic locations. Again, we're going to be heavily resorting to our states glyphs here to randomize some features pertaining to aquatic locations. Okay, now with water, we can do a little bit more with that. We can go to a little bit more detail with that if you need to, as I'm going to show you here shortly. So let's get to it. So first, we need to know what our aquatic plane that we're dealing with. Okay, so what type of body, right? So spin and look at your states glyphs. Okay, now again, very important. The very center symbols are my most the ones I'm most concerned about right now. So guess what? Square, the lines in the middle. Guess what the lines make me think of? They make me nice, straight, smooth, fluid, flowing water. A river comes to mind when I see that in this context. We know it's an aquatic body, and our subject is a river. Okay, so now let's do it again. Okay, now let's say in this river, for whatever reason, you may be concerned about the underwater terrain. So what's underneath the water, right? What's inside? If a character looks in, they want to see what's inside, or they want to jump in, right? How would you describe that randomly? Okay, lightly spin. Look at your states glyphs, and what do we have? From my perspective, these two are level. I'm going to go with one on the left because that's how we read. Most of us do. The hexagon or the clustered states glyph. And guess what? I have an underwater cavern here. So that's an opportunity for my character to explore. Okay, most likely a treasure or some creature's lair under there. Okay, now let's see if you're interested in any underwater impressions. Okay, so same thing here. Lightly spin, drop it, and again, I'm not caring about the randomization too much here. I just want to show you, right? I'm just playing around here. So again, states glyphs, and once again, I got the hexagon cluster. Okay, guess what? Any underwater impressions? Oh, there's an interesting rock formation. Okay, so maybe a reef of some kind, or a rock that doesn't belong there, or maybe something that really stands out in the river. Okay, or as a formation, you could interpret it as something man-made. You know, a statue, you know, a relic, again, something that really stands out or something that doesn't belong there in the water is how I would see that in this context, right? So a statue, maybe, okay? Now, underwater growth. Do I really care about that? I personally don't in most cases, but if you need to know, what does underwater growth look like, okay? So very simple, spin the token. Guess what? States glyphs. Okay, I got the square and I got the linear. So that tells me it's a sponge. Okay, so it's not algae, it's not a plant, it's not a reef, or or a shipwreck or whatever. In this case, sponge comes to mind. Okay, I say that because it's a nice layered, symbol here. Lines on top of each other. You could interpret that differently, and feel free to interpret it how you please. But I think of a sponge when that shows up. So I'm going to write that down. And then we're going to put all these clues together. Oh, guess what? So we have some kind of sponge under there, but possibly by the interesting statue formation that you just found. Okay, so possibly poisonous. You don't know, but that's, again, the architect is describing at that moment in time. Let's look at water conditions. So how is the water behaving? Very important, especially with a river, right? Okay, lightly spin. Look at your states glyphs. Okay, got the hexagon. Okay, it's a very clustered formation. Inner symbol I'm looking at once again. Okay, and it's shallow. Okay, so this is a pretty shallow river we're talking about, right? Okay, so something that somebody can jump in and possibly waist deep or not have to dive very far, obviously. So that's what that tells me here. So shallow. Okay, and let's see. Let's spin again for water. Let's see, condition. Let me write that down. Okay, water status. Okay, what is the overall status of the water itself? Okay, once again, we're looking at the inner symbol, and we're looking at the water itself. What condition is the water in? Okay, the water itself, not so much its movement, but is it dirty, clean, murky? What are we talking about here? So when we talk about water status, okay, so I just spun. I got the circle with the dotted arrangement inside, and in my mind, the first thing that comes to is murky, dirty water, right? Clouded, murky water. That's what the dots communicate to me at that moment in time. So, murky. So maybe the formation that he saw, that your character saw, he had to look through the murky water to be able to see it, right? But, so, to me, it seems a little bit more dangerous to jump in there because I can't see very good to begin with. But it's also shallow, so maybe they'll take the risk, right? So let me see. Let me jot that down. And finally, this is an optional one. I tugged that along there just to have, but I don't find it that important. But some people may, I guess, is water features. Okay, so any additional features that you can describe by the river. Okay, so we're talking about a river, so we know a lot about the river itself, what's inside, but any other thing that we may need to know. Okay, same thing. States glyphs and the circle again. Okay, so in this case, oh, guess what? There's an island. So that's what that tells me. So when we talk about features, as far as water goes, we're talking about beaches, sandbars that stick out, islands, little tiny islands, any rock that are interesting besides the features that we already mentioned. So in this case, here we know that there's a small island, in the middle of the river. Okay, or in this case, we're talking about a river, so maybe not a conventional island, but maybe a rock formation of some kind that juts out, that functions like an island. Okay, so now we have our most important of the 7 clues, and again, I know it seems like a lot, but it's in practice, it's very quick, and I'm putting these together to form one nice picture. So real quick, let me summarize here, and we're going to move on. So we have a river, okay. Underneath the river, you have what looks like a cavern formation that leads to who knows where. Okay, you have a very interesting rock formation, or possibly a statue that's kind of hard to see that's in there. Looks like a sponge type of plant that lives underwater. Okay, maybe guarding it, so possibly dangerous. The water conditions, it's a very shallow water. So, again, if you want to do shallow, if you want to be specific, spin the digits on feet. Okay. So you could say here, I just spun, it's 8 feet deep. So shallow water in this case, we're looking at about 8 feet. Anywhere from 1 to 10 feet you could consider shallow in this context. Okay, again, it's all relative. Maybe you want to use the element glyphs. It doesn't matter. But in this case, let's say it's 8 feet. Okay, and water status, like I said, is murky water. And there's a little island type feature jutting out from the center of the river. So very nice description here, okay, of our aquatic body, and just by using the clues that the glyphs gives us. Okay, so very awesome stuff. Now let's move on to celestial bodies. So now let's get into the randomization of things that you're going to see in outer space, right? So for those of you playing sci-fi settings, I love sci-fi personally. This is going to be something that you'll be interested in. Now, unlike aquatic locations or landscapes and whatnot, we're going to be focusing more on the element glyphs for space, because there's just so much more possibilities out there, very elemental in nature in my opinion. So we're going to be focusing mostly on the element glyphs, a couple states glyphs, and a little bit of usage of the omni-grid, but mostly I'm concerned with the element glyphs when I'm talking about outer space. Okay, so got my notes here on my side, the things that I'm interested in looking at here, and again, these are all relative on the context. And let's see, now that section is let's see, what page am I going to be looking at? So page 352 all the way through 355, that deals with the celestial features. Okay, now that's one that you may be referencing a little bit more until you get a lot of practice, okay, especially when you're dealing with the sizes, because again, space is so vast, there's so many ridiculous possibilities out there. So that is there for you if you need it. But right, clinically, let's take a look at how we randomize a celestial body, right, a celestial location, something of that nature. So lightly spin. Oh, that wasn't very good. Let me just shake it real quick and just get a light spin in there. And I'm looking at element glyphs, remember? So water. So let's see. So the first thing I need to know is the general celestial body class, right? That's the first thing I need to know. So in this case, let's see. The water could mean a galaxy, it could mean a black hole, a wormhole, or it could mean a chunk of ice, okay? Water alone is kind of vague from that, so let's go a little bit more detailed, okay? So my first result was water, right? To narrow it down, you're going to want combinations of elements. So water, and for the specific celestial body, now that I know water, oh, guess what? I spun water again. So we're combining elements to narrow it down. And water of water, okay, oh, guess what? It's a piece of ice, right? It makes sense. Look at the elements and think about it. That's what I want you to notice here. Don't just read the definitions that I wrote in the book. Understand how this works. Water of water in outer space, to me, I would think means a nice big chunk of ice, right? Think about it. Let's say I spun fire, okay? As an example. Let's say I spun fire, right? As my first class. That could be a star, a comet, a pulsar, or a quasar, right? Something very flamboyant, very fiery and energetic in nature, right? That's what fire communicates to me, okay? So then I would spin again, right? And let's say it landed on water, okay? Just as an example. So fire and water. So the water of fire, right? To me, tells me a galaxy, okay? But again, I'm going to go on by my first example. Let's say the chunk of ice, okay, that I did randomly. Now, let's say I'm thinking of a planet. Let's say my result was a planet, okay? And I want to know, I'm flying by with my mothership, and I want to know if that planet is compatible with life, okay? How would I do that randomly? Spending all this time. Very simple. And again, come up with your own interpretations and your own ways of doing things. That's on you, okay? But let's see. Life compatibility, we're looking for what? Water and air, right? So that's how we look at it. So spin twice. Oh, and guess what? I got water and I got fire. So that planet is not compatible. For it to be compatible randomly again, you know, without having to use a special suit, you ideally want to spin it twice, and you want. In this case, it's not compatible without a special suit, right? And again, just randomly, okay? If I want to know, let's see, it's not compatible. Compatible. Okay, planetary composition. Let's say I'm one of those people that's really interested about a planet's composition, okay? Now again, these are different examples I'm giving you, but let's say for whatever reason I have to know what this thing is mostly comprised of, okay? Again, I'm not a scientist. I mean, by all means, you know, get Dr. Tyson on this. Let's see. So spinning the element glyphs, and again, we're looking at very primordial things. So carbon would be, you know, very terrestrial in nature. Fire would be hydrogen. Water, we're looking mostly nitrogen. And the air element glyph alludes to oxygen and gas. So that's the overall composition. In this case, we're looking at hydrogen, right? So very fiery, hot, hydrogen-based planet. Okay, based on that clue. Okay. So let's see here. Now let's look at the. Let's take a look at, and when I say surface, I mean, you know, the terrestrial surface itself. What is it made of? Is it made of dirt, sand? Is it rocky, lava? You know, is it water or ice? Or is there any growth or development there? You know, a planet that's already, inhabited. Okay, so that's the kind of things I would look at if I was flying by a ship. You know, in a ship, right? So spin, and here with when you're talking about the terrestrial surface, the general composition, you want to look at the face that the token falls on. Okay, that just gives you more options. So positive side and negative side. Okay, so keep that in mind here, and again, you'll see that in the book what I mean. So let's just lightly spin, and guess what? It's carbon, and it landed on the plus sign. So dirt. That's what comes to mind. So the positive side of carbon in this example for a planet, it's dirt. So this surface is very earthen in nature and it's covered in dirt. Okay, so that's the overall surface composition. Okay, so this planet, you know, in this example, is not inhabitable for life, and it's just covered in dirt, so very barren, right? You could just say that, okay, for quickness sake. So orbit features, what are we talking about here? Orbit features, another quality you could consider. Okay, so for that I'm going to use the states glyphs. Okay, so are we talking about any special rings it has, you know, any probes or space stations, or you know, moon or debris flying around, or any craters on the planet? So you know, features like that are what we're talking about here. So spending all the looking at states. So states glyphs here, I got the circle with the dots in the middle. So in this case, that communicates, you know, it's got moons or it's got debris floating around. So in this case, let's say it's got a moon, right? How many moons? Okay, so this planet has 5 moons. So so we're starting to get a picture here. So in the first example, we had the ice particle, right? But when we're talking about planets, we're talking about one here randomly that's not compatible with life. It's got nothing but barren dirt on it. And the orbit features, I just spun, it's got 5 moons around it. Now you can go more detailed if you need to from there, but we already have a general picture. Okay, what color is a planet? Okay, that I'm looking at. That's not in the book, but by now you should be able to know how to do random colors. Okay. And again, this may not be scientifically accurate, but this is a game. We can get away with a lot more cool stuff than we can in the real world. So, black. Okay, it's not going to be solid black, but a very dark, you know, gritty color that we're talking here. So, pretty depressing place to be. Okay, very lonely, depressing place. Okay, exotic mineral composition. So, for those of you who really want to know what kind of treasures there from natural resources and minerals, there's a really cool way we can do that. Okay, let's take a look. So for that, because you're dealing with so many possibilities, we want to use letter clues. So for that, we're going to use the OmniGrid. That's one reason why I have this here. So again, unless you know all the elements, you know, you're a scientist or you know a lot about minerals, you'll probably need to refer to a chart of some default ones that I have here, and just drop the token in until you get your results. So the book says 3 times. I mean, it could be 3 to 5 times. As long as you get your clue, you know, as quick as possible. We want it to be quick, right? So the first letter I've got was T. Okay. Oh, guess what? The first one comes to mind is tungsten, but it could be tanzanite also. Let's take a look here. A. So T-A were the first clues that I get. So right then and there, tanzanite comes to mind. Right off the bat. So suddenly this boring, depressing, dirty, dark world with 5 moons around it has lots of tanzanite there, okay? So something very valuable we can use. And you see how quick I did those letter clues. It jogged my mind and it gave me the answer that I needed at that moment in time, okay? Now, in this example, this planet, you know, is generally uninhabited. But let's say you have an advanced civilization, or you think, or maybe was a civilization, or you have a different planet, okay? Different example, okay? Let's say you need to know a planet civilization class, okay? So you're in your fancy ship, right? And you detect that there's a civilization, okay? What kind of civilization inhabits the planet, okay? How do I know that? So here, I'm going to look at civilizations ranked numerically from 0 is the least, you know, developed, you know, Stone Age people, through 9, which is a Type 4 civilization. So your Kardashev, however you pronounce it, scale. Okay. So again, for that, I'm going to use the digits and rank them from 0 to 9. And page 354 gives you a nice detail of each one. So take a look at it. So I'm going to spin, and I'm going to interpret the digits here. So 2, from my vantage point, is 2. So they're primeval. So there is a civilization on the random planet, or on this example, or whatever. Different planet, obviously the one's not inhabitable, but let's say another world I want to find out. They're primeval. So yeah, a medieval type civilization or something equivalent to a medieval civilization is on that planet. So advanced spacefaring traveler like you are, pretty easy target if you need to pillage them. Okay, so that's essentially what that tells me as an architect. Finally, celestial feature size. Okay, now that one is going to require some referencing. There's just no other way around it. Okay, because again, you're talking about, you know, the vastness of space, and there's so many possibilities and ridiculous outcomes. That's why on page 355 I have a nice chart for you to save you time. But this is one of those when you spin your token. So with sizes, when we're talking about celestial features, we have triple S all the way to triple L and everything in between, just like we're used to seeing by now. Okay, triple S being the smallest and triple L being the largest. So okay, let's say my example that I'm talking about is a planet. Okay, randomly off the bat, I'm talking about a planet, and I want to know the random size of this thing. Okay, one way to do it is the way that I showed you in the very beginning of this segment with random miles. You could do it that way, or you could do it by using the polarity glyphs here. So the polarity glyphs, remember, as you know, have numerical value. So triple negative means triple S, right? The smallest. Triple positive, let me see if I find that here. Triple positive here is triple S, the greatest, right? Okay, X would be neutral, would be right in the middle. Okay, so by now you should understand how the polarity glyphs refer to size. So, you know, like I showed you earlier, you know, more manually, you could do it this way too and simply refer to the charts. Again, when you're talking space, that's probably something I would recommend doing. So lightly spin and interpret the polarity glyphs and determine your planet's size. So negative for a planet is considered small, so it's about 5,000 miles. Again, the chart just told me that. Again, this is one of those examples you can look if you don't want to do it manually. So one negative here for a planet is a small planet, so about 5,000 miles in diameter. So that's pretty much all there is to it here. Nice, beautiful details available to us just by using the power of the token, as you've seen for yourself, as I've shown you very clinically, coupled with our OmniGrid, gives you a lot of possibilities. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for our randomization part of this chapter. Let's wrap things up in the next section of the environments chapter. We're going to talk about some other cool stuff. So we've had a great deal of fun randomizing different types of locations. Hope you learned something there, and how we paint with our minds using the glyphs, and I mean, really just the infinite possibilities that can happen. They're pretty incredible, and it's yours to explore and develop as you see fit to what you need. So again, there is no right or wrong answer here. Nobody's judging you or testing you on this, and I mean, ultimately, it's something to make you sharper and not limit your possibilities as much like other numbers do. I mean, this one guy come up to me, he's like, yeah, I have a D20, and a D20 can randomize everything if I want to. I'm like, no, dude. Try describing somebody's facial features randomly using dice. It's dummy. It's just not possible unless you have a list of features, which again is more time consuming. That's why, yes, my random approach does require some study and practice. It's just like anything worth it, your time. You have to put some effort into it, but I mean, there's the results that you can do are just incredible with this once you understand how the symbols will work. So that's what we just did with randomizing. Now let's talk about terrains. Okay, we're still in the environment chapter on page 357. Now I'm just going to skim over real quickly for the rest of this chapter, and we're going to move on to different things. So terrain is very important. So terrain in glyphs, I define as the geographical feature present within a location. So organic or manipulated characteristics, all that stuff, right? So the nature of the terrain on your location can affect your character's movement, their status, and so forth. So, and whether or not you need a vehicle to even be able to travel there. So very important to consider the terrain your character's on, okay, in the location. Now, and in this case, for terrain, I didn't think it was very practical to randomize that, just because the results can be so skewed, it would almost be stupid to do so. If you got, a landscape and you put glass there, well, I mean, I guess you could, but it would just be too abstract in my opinion. So that's for you, the architect, to decide what type of terrain features here in detail that you put into your location. Okay, so here you're going to see some different options of different types of terrain. Okay, a nice variety of them and how they affect your character. Okay, so page 358 and beyond, we got some really cool options here to consider. So mud. Okay, let's take a look at mud. Okay, what does mud do? How does that affect your character? So, very thick, can prevent running, evading, it can hamper your techniques, and so forth, right? Now, if mud is slick, it increases the chances of fumbling, okay? So any character that attempts an overt action, okay, anything very intentional, right, on slick mud, okay, including attacking, especially attacking, face an additional 30% chance of slipping to the ground, okay? Or the mud can simply just slow you down depending on how bad it is, right? So let's take a look here. Next page. Let me see. Scroll down. Just some other examples. Again, it's your job to go through these and get some ideas of how you can incorporate them. I'm just going to show you. Okay, let's take a look at leaves, right? How can leaves affect your character? Okay, people ignore these kind of details when they're just rushing through. They're just killing stuff. They just, oh my god, I got this awesome treasure that I just found. But a lot of game masters ignore these types of details that, really, not only instill a lot of realism and immersion, and I can't emphasize it enough, but also change the consequence. It raises the stakes a little bit when you factor in all these environmental conditions and such the terrain does. So leaves, okay, how can leaves affect you? So in this example, depending on seasonal factors, obviously, leaves can litter the ground in patches everywhere, right? So they can be ideal to conceal and hide yourself in. So if you're doing that, movement can certainly, hold on, let me see here. So you can certainly conceal yourself if you're camouflaged, right? But if somebody's walking on them, right, the very crunchy leaves, I'm sure you've seen the movies, right, where the guy's trying to be slick and he steps on a pile of leaves and guess what? He gets shot because the enemy just caught him. That's what we're reflecting here. So if you're moving on top of leaves, especially if they're dry, by default they emit a level 2 of ambient sound. We're going to talk about sound in a minute here. And so our enemies are alerted. So pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to go into too much detail there. So same things here. How does brush affect your character? Or gravel, all these things. Ice, snow, debris, water, puddles of water, How can all these affect your character's modifier? Water. Let's look at water. So if your character is standing in water, right, that can affect you up to -3 to all your modifiers, depending on what the architect wants to do there. Okay, if you're fully submerged, okay, melee combat is limited to the M1 range, and your vision becomes blurred. Okay, obviously, in most cases, anyways. Okay, if you have water with currents, okay, times T2 equals the number of minutes you're able to swim against the current. Or let's say your character's at extreme depths. Okay, for whatever reason that happens, you're subjected to number 1 pressure per instance. So remember, number sign, you do the digits. So I spin randomly, right, and it lands on 6. So 6 times 1 is 6. So 6 marks per instant or per minute of damage from pressure, if I'm looking at that. So this is the kind of things that water can do, and that's probably not everything listed, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about with terrain, okay? How it can affect your character, especially their modifiers, their movement, and other things. So that pretty much conditions. Terrain itself, that can have an impact on your character. A lot of other things can impact it as well. Environmentally, we're talking about conditions here. So weather and climate, all that crazy stuff. So Cold, heat, wind, fog, humidity. How does that affect your character? And again, you may only have to glance at these once in a while, or once per session, or once per special environment. It's up to you how you use them. But I definitely recommend having these on hand to glance at any time, because you're going to see why here. So let's see. How does heat affect your character, right? Let's say you want to focus on, more realism or whatever, heat. So here, the intensity of a location's heat level can temporarily reduce the character's constitution by 1 rank while you're in the middle of, ridiculous heat. Okay, in addition, prolonged exposure to heat may have a 35% chance of inducing hyperthermia for every 5 minutes of exposure. So that's one really nasty way heat can affect your character. Okay, or let's look at humidity. Okay, nobody thinks about that, but I did. I'm trying to be as detailed as possible, give you as many options to you, the architect. So humidity. Okay, high levels of humidity decrease the character's comfort level by 1 rank. Okay, which dampens the recovery of ether, EP, like we've talked about, okay? Also, obviously, sensitive electronic equipment, okay, in most cases anyways, will have a 35% chance of sustaining liquid damage for every minute of exposure and therefore becoming useless. So little details like that that are provided in environmental conditions can go a long way and have a serious effect on your character. Rainfall, there's another one. Snowfall, hail, sleet, lightning, all these crazy things, right? Rainfall. How does rainfall affect you? Okay, rainfall decreases movement and comfort levels by 1 rank. Okay, sight can be reduced to level 1, which is dim, as we're going to see here shortly, based on how heavy it is. Okay, terrestrial vehicles, the difficulty driving them are increased by up to 2 levels. So a lot of crazy things can happen just from rainfall alone. So take a look at these and use what you need for yourself. Surface conditions, different types of surfaces, hazardous conditions, how they affect your character. Okay, so all these are there for you to use. Besides just throwing monsters at people, think about ways that the environment can hamper or kill your player characters and change the course of the campaign. Okay, spatial conditions, we've got disabling conditions, magnetic conditions, stench, the vacuum of space, spatial conditions as an example. Here's another really nice one. Okay, tight. Let's look at tight for a second. So tight spaces, if you think about it, include very narrow corridors, shafts, or very compact rooms that can barely accommodate the character. So the vent, the air vents like in Aliens, or you're squeezing through the tomb and you get this very narrow space to squeeze through to get to the other side, right? Stuff like that is what we're talking about, tight spaces. Okay, so obviously comfort modifiers are nullified during that moment, and even worse, techniques, a lot of melee combat and H2A combat are limited to the M1 range, so you can barely attack at all. Probably not going to be able to use any techniques or anything fancy because your movement is so restricted. So another example on how our environmental conditions can affect your character's experience. Take a look at them and use them as you see fit. Okay, let's see. Now, that pretty much covers it for conditions. Now, one more tiny section to cover for environments. We're going to talk about the senses. One final and very important section to cover here for the environments to consider are stimuli and awareness checks. Okay, now awareness checks, we're going to go into more detail in the encounters chapter and how to actually execute them. Here we're talking about different types of stimuli that we look at. Okay, so let's see. So we have light, sound, scent, and flavor. Okay, and we don't look at touch here in this game. We're looking at 4 types of stimuli, right? So light. Okay, here you have different levels that we look at in glyphs. Okay, so let's see. So it's level 0 is black, right? It's pitch black or awfully damn close. So very dark or completely black, right? Let's see. Then it has the effects of what being in pitch black lighting can do. Okay, and so forth. So read it for yourself. Level 1 lighting would be considered dim lighting, so you can barely make out the silhouettes and subtle features of the immediate surroundings. You can navigate enough fairly comfortably, but can't do much more than that because the lighting is very dim, right? So here's the specific effects that it does. Level 3 lighting is lit, so nice evenly lit room, right? Clear visibility, normal lighting. Level 3 lit is basically, I'm sorry, level 2 lit. So level 0, 1, 2. 2 of anything is basically standard or run-of-the-mill. So 2 is nice evenly lit, clear visibility. Level 3 is bright light, right? So high luminosity, flushes out a lot of details, but it can be overwhelming to your eyes in some cases, right? Okay, in this case, that can affect stealth attempts and so forth. So you kind of get the idea on the different stimuli here. Now, as you're going to learn with awareness checks, you're going to have different senses to use with versus a different stimuli to be able to use them, and we'll talk about that later in encounters. So here is an example for light. Okay, for awareness checks, if you're considering lighting, you want to factor in the character's vision rank versus the lighting rank. Okay, and we're going to talk about that, like I said, in encounters. But each of these stimuli tells you what they are, the different levels of intensity, and how they affect your character is what that is. So page 368 and 369 talks about stimuli. So take some time, look it over, have it at your side. Now, last page here on environments, 370. Okay, we're talking about temperature and indexes. Okay, here's a way at the very bottom to randomize temperature if you need it. There's a glyphs similar to what we did before with randomizing size. Okay, generate your numbers and your digits and your zeros using the element glyphs. Okay, take a look at that. But one thing I want you to notice here are temperature and climate indexes. Okay, so very important. Temperature from the the environment that your character is in at the moment has a very direct impact on their overall well-being. Okay, so for those of you who are interested in realism and tracking how the environment can affect your character, okay, versus just killing monsters and stuff, then this is what you would refer to if the temperature is important. Again, a lot of game masters don't care. They can just summarize it, but if you want to go to that detail, it is here for you. Okay, so let's take a look here at what this chart means and before we wrap this up. So here on the right we have temperature indexes. So these are numerical values that I came up with to basically imply a range of temperatures. Now, index value, you remember seeing that back from the apparel chapter, okay? So reference this if we need to, if you want, how well your clothing works in certain environments. This is what I'm referring to, right? As an example here, from 101 degrees to 110 degrees, that represents an index of 1, okay? So from, let's say, 70 degrees to 80 degrees, it's an index of 18, okay? So beautiful weather, right? Right in the middle, okay? Let's say I go from 32 degrees to minus 135 degrees. That's an index of 36. And finally, that's really cold, right? And finally, the coldest here that I have at least written is negative 136 to negative 455, so really damn cold, right? Would have an index value of 60. So 1 through 60 are your index values here. So just take a look at that. This is just a quick numerical way of matching them up to temperature ranges. And stay tuned for the next chapter. We're going to be going over civilizations, and we're going to do something similar that we did here as far as randomizing. But right now I know I threw a lot at you. This is a pretty intense chapter, but it's also a lot of fun, especially when you're used to randomizing things. And more importantly, understanding how your environment can affect the character experience.